He threw a bottle of water at me, right in front of everyone, and laughed, holding her hand. Everyone waited for me to explode, to scream, to defend my dignity. But I didn't. I just smiled. That smile wasn't weakness, it was the calm before his downfall. Let me tell you how it all began. The room smelled faintly of champagne and victory, the kind of smell that should have felt sweet, but to me, it burned. The company was celebrating its biggest quarter yet, and everyone was gathered in that grand conference hall filled with gold balloons, flashing cameras, and self-congratulations. It was supposed to be Amir's big day, my husband, the man who once promised to conquer the world with me, not without me. I stood near the edge of the room, smiling at polite faces, watching him move through the crowd like he owned the air everyone breathed. His laughter was loud, confident, the laughter of a man who believed nothing could touch him. But something in his voice had changed over the months, sharper, colder. And beside him, clinging to his arm like a trophy, was Layla. Young, beautiful, recklessly confident, the kind of woman who had never known the taste of sacrifice. She laughed at everything he said, brushed invisible dust from his suit, leaned into him as if to remind me, he's mine now. It was strange, standing there in that sea of smiles, realizing that I was the only one who saw through the act. Everyone else saw a powerful couple, Amir and Layla, the golden pair of the company. I saw what they really were, a performance built on betrayal. I'd known for weeks. I'd seen the messages, the late-night calls, the lies. But I had said nothing. Not because I was weak, but because I'd learned that silence was a weapon. When the party started, the music was soft, the laughter forced. I was a ghost among them, the loyal wife, tolerated but ignored. My place had been reduced to a shadow in his grand empire. Yet, I stood tall, every inch of me wrapped in quiet dignity. I refused to give them the show they wanted, the angry wife, the public drama. Amir spotted me finally. His expression shifted for a second, something almost like guilt flashed across his face, then vanished as Layla whispered something in his ear. He smiled, a cruel, careless smile, and raised a bottle of sparkling water from the table. Zara, he called out loudly, drawing every eye in the room. My name echoed across the hall. I turned slowly, my heartbeat steady. He was grinning like a boy showing off. Layla giggled beside him, her hand sliding down his arm. Let's see if our guest of honor can handle a little fun. He joked, shaking the bottle. I frowned slightly. Amir, don't. Before I could finish, the bottle flew through the air. It hit my shoulder with a dull thud, the icy water bursting over me, soaking my dress, dripping down my arms. For a moment, time froze. The room went silent, the kind of silence that hums with disbelief. Then, laughter. Sharp, cruel. Layla clutched his arm, laughing so hard she had to hold her stomach. Oh my God, Amir. You didn't, she said between giggles. He chuckled too, trying to play it off. Come on, Zara, lighten up. It's just water, just humiliation, just another attempt to make me feel small so he could look bigger beside her. Dozens of eyes were on me, waiting for me to crack, to yell, to slap him. My soaked dress clung to my skin, my hair stuck to my neck, my heart pounded. But inside, something strange happened. I didn't break. I smiled. I picked up a napkin from the nearby table, gently dabbed the water from my arm, and looked at him with a calmness that confused everyone. You're right, I said softly, my voice steady. It's time I lighten up. And then I turned around and walked out. The heels of my shoes echoed across the marble floor, each step louder than any insult they could throw. No one followed me. No one dared. They were too busy processing the fact that I hadn't reacted. That I had chosen dignity over drama. Outside, the evening wind was cool against my skin. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the air, feeling strangely calm. The sky above was painted with streaks of gold and purple, as if even the universe was trying to whisper, not yet, Zara. Not yet. At home, I peeled off the wet dress, tossed it in the corner, and looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't broken, she was awakening. My reflection smiled, faintly, knowingly. He thought he'd embarrassed me. He didn't realize he'd just given me my moment of power. Because what he didn't know, what no one knew, was that I wasn't just his wife. I was the quiet architect of his success. Every deal, every investor, every partnership, I had built those bridges while he took the credit. Legally, I was his business partner. Financially, half of everything he owned was already mine. So, while he played games with Layla, I'd been preparing my own, one that didn't involve shouting or tears, only truth. That night, I opened my laptop, scrolled through the documents I'd quietly collected over the past months, evidence of fund transfers, private messages, offshore payments, all tied to her. Every file, every signature, every transaction was another thread in the web he'd spun for himself. And I had the scissors ready. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. But sometimes, peace comes only after the truth burns everything falls to the ground. The next morning, I arrived at his office before he did. The receptionist blinked in surprise. "Ma'am, you're early today." "I just needed to sign a few documents," I said with a polite smile. And I did. I signed the papers that made it official. His empire, our empire, was no longer under his sole control. Half of it belonged to me, publicly and legally. By the time Amir walked in, laughing with Layla, I was already sitting in the boardroom, reviewing the agenda for the day. He looked startled to see me there but quickly masked it with his usual arrogance. "Zara, what brings you here?" he asked smoothly. I smiled without looking up. "Just doing my part as co-owner. You know, business doesn't run on charm alone." Layla looked uneasy. Amir laughed nervously. "Right, of course." I could see the flicker of worry behind his confident mask. For the first time, I saw him realize I wasn't the quiet, submissive wife he'd imagined. I was the storm he never prepared for. That night, as I drove home, the radio played softly, and the city lights blurred in the distance. I thought of that moment, the bottle, the laughter, the humiliation, and for the first time, I was grateful for it. Because that was the moment I woke up. He threw water at me to make me small, to turn me into a joke. But what he didn't know was that sometimes, the calmest surface hides the deepest current. And soon, that current would pull him under, without me ever lifting a hand. And so, I smiled again, that same calm smile, because I knew. The woman he tried to humiliate was gone. The one who would end him, had just been born. He laughed when he threw that bottle, but when I walked back into his office weeks later, he couldn't breathe. The same hands that humiliated me were shaking. He didn't know that I'd been quietly preparing for this moment all along, not out of anger, but out of justice. The day everything came crashing down started like any other. The building smelled of coffee, ambition, and deceit. Employees rushed through glass doors, unaware that the empire they worked for was standing on the edge of collapse. I sat quietly in the back of the meeting room, my presence unexpected, maybe even unwanted, but necessary. Amir stood at the front, his voice confident, rehearsed, dripping with that same arrogance he'd worn like a crown for years. Layla sat next to him, her perfect smile never faltering. They looked like the perfect couple in control of a perfect business. The presentation was dazzling, charts, projections, promises. Everyone was nodding, impressed. No one noticed me yet. I waited patiently as he boasted about the company's next big step, about how his leadership had taken them to heights no one imagined. My lips curved slightly. It was poetic, really, the man who thought he was unstoppable, about to trip over the very lies he built. "Let's move to the financial reports," said one of the investors. Amir clicked to the next slide. And then, chaos. The screen flickered once, then twice, before stabilizing on a document that wasn't part of his presentation. It was a bank transfer record, with Layla's name clearly printed on it, attached to a six-figure amount. Then another. And another. The murmurs started. Heads turned. Confused eyes darted between the screen and Amir. He froze. His face drained of color. "That's not supposed to be there," he stammered, fumbling with the remote. Layla's hands trembled beside him. "What is this?" one of the board members demanded. "Why are company funds being transferred to a private account in Singapore under her name?" I chose that moment to stand. "Because," I said softly, walking forward, "this company has been paying for their affair." The room fell silent. Every head turned. The sound of my heels against the floor was the only thing anyone could hear. Amir stared at me as if he were seeing a ghost. "Zara, what are you doing here?" I smiled calmly, making sure the truth gets the attention it deserves. I turned toward the board. "Good morning. I'm Zara Khan, co-founder and legal co-owner of this company. I've stayed silent long enough, but I can't let this continue." The financial discrepancies you see on the screen were made without my consent. In fact, they were deliberately hidden from me. Gasps rippled through the room. The investors began flipping through the papers I'd discreetly placed on their tables before the meeting began, copies of every fraudulent transfer, every message, every forged signature. Amir tried to recover his composure. Zara, you don't understand, this isn't. I raised a hand. Oh, I understand perfectly. I understand that while I was at home believing in our marriage, you were using our company funds to impress your lover. I understand that you thought throwing water at me in front of your employees would make you powerful. But what you don't understand, Amir, is that I stopped being your victim the moment you humiliated me. Layla stood abruptly, her face pale. You can't prove. I turned to her with a steady gaze. Every transaction bears your name. Every gift, every transfer, every flight ticket. You might want to check your email. I just forwarded everything to your bank. Good luck explaining it when they freeze your account. Her lips parted in shock. She looked at Amir, her voice trembling. You said no one would find out. And that was it, the moment his world cracked. The investors stood, furious, whispering among themselves. The company's lawyer walked toward me and asked quietly, Mrs. Khan, are you pressing charges? I looked at Amir. His eyes were wide, his chest rising and falling quickly. He looked small for the first time in his life. No, I said softly. I'm not pressing charges. I'm simply walking away, with my half. The lawyer nodded respectfully. The investors followed me, out, offering apologies and promises of immediate action. Behind me, I heard Amir's voice break. Zara, wait. Don't do this, please. I stopped at the door and turned around. You already did this, Amir. The day you threw that bottle, you threw away your respect, your marriage, and your company. I'm just collecting what's left of my dignity. And then I walked out. The headlines came within days. CEO accused of fraudulent transfers and misconduct. Company co-founder exposes internal corruption. His face was everywhere, not as a hero this time, but as a scandal. The man who once stood tall now hid from cameras. Layla vanished, her social media accounts deleted overnight. Meanwhile, I moved forward quietly. I reopened my design firm, the one I had sacrificed years ago for his dreams. Within months, my first independent project went viral, a campaign about women reclaiming their strength. The tagline, dignity never begs, it rebuilds. One afternoon, as I was leaving my new office, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Zara. His voice was hoarse, broken. I sighed softly. Amir, I lost everything, he said quietly. The investors pulled out, Layla's gone, and I'm under investigation. I don't know where to start. For a moment, I said nothing. Then, start by saying sorry, not to me, but to the version of yourself that forgot how to respect people. He was silent. I could hear his breath shaking. You were right, he finally said. That day, when I threw that bottle, I thought you were weak because you didn't react. But now I know, that silence was my sentence. I closed my eyes. Goodbye, Amir. And that was it. The chapter closed. Months later, I stood in front of a large audience, speaking at a women's business summit. The lights were warm, the applause sincere. I took a breath and smiled at the crowd. Sometimes, I began, you're forced into moments that humiliate you, moments that strip you bare. But those moments aren't your end, they're your awakening. The world will test your grace, your silence, your strength. Let them, because when you choose dignity over anger, truth fights for you. The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed, and I smiled genuinely, not for revenge, not for victory, but for peace. That night, as I looked at the city skyline from my apartment window, I thought about that bottle of water again, how cold it had felt on my skin, how hot the laughter had burned in my ears. Now, it was just a memory. A drop in the ocean of everything I'd built since. He had thrown water to make me small. But I had learned how to swim, and he had drowned in his own arrogance. And that, I realized, was life's greatest irony. When they try to destroy your peace, sometimes all you have to do is stay calm, because the storm they create will end up consuming only them.